The reality of what's to come. Who would have thought I'd be paralyzed from the waist down? This is what happens when you don't listen to your in-laws. My mother-in-law's cheerful voice can be heard from the speaker of the landline. It's a late afternoon at my parents' house. My mother, holding a purse in one hand, looks at me with a blank expression, as if she doesn't understand what's being said. It seems that someone has had an accident and is overjoyed about it. My mother-in-law, with a puzzled look on her face, asks her mother-in-law, what do you mean by tough? As we look at each other, my mother-in-law laughs out loud on the other end of the phone. Apparently, my father-in-law passed away at an early age, and my mother-in-law has been living alone for a long time, so she's been lonely and has asked my husband and I to live with her. At first, she said she didn't want me to pay rent or do housework, but less than 2 months later, she changed her mind and said that it's only natural for adults to pay the rent. She argued with my husband and me over and over again. In the end, our relationship couldn't be repaired, and with my husband's encouragement, we moved out of my parents' house, so I was living with them to help carry their belongings. My mother-in-law, who has a mean personality and has been causing me trouble every day. Just as she used to hurl nasty remarks at me, she said this to my mother, "That's why. That idiot girl's brakes didn't work and she caused a big accident. That's ridiculous." Quote. As I passed the station, I couldn't help but speak into the speaker. "Your daughter-in-law, right? I'm fine. What's the accident?" Quote. "My name is Mako. I'm 35 years old and currently work as a salesperson for luxury accessories at a department store. I graduated from a college and have been working at an accessories shop for nearly 15 years. Although I'm a veteran in the workforce, I find it fun and rewarding to keep up with the latest trends and customer requests, so I work energetically every day. The age range of my workplace is wide, but since I sell accessories for women, the sales staff is biased toward women. I'm one of only a handful of single people among them. I've always wanted to get married, and I've been looking for a partner through introductions from friends, but I'm about to turn 35 without finding a partner. That's why I decided to open a marriage agency a year ago. I listened sincerely to the counselor and explained my values and lifestyle in detail. They considered whether these matched, and as a result of the matching process, I met a man named Hart, an engineer. He was a year older than me, and he was pleasant to talk to, and I was very impressed by how he listened to me, even though he seemed a little embarrassed. We got to know each other better and went on several dates. I often found myself using sales pitches, but as I talked to him, my fears gradually melted away. After meeting several times, we became close enough that Hart would talk passionately about his favorite novels and I would nod along, the complete opposite of how we had felt at the beginning. We both agreed that we would never find such a good match again. With deep trust in each other, we decided to get married. We were looking for a new home near my husband's family home. My father-in-law had apparently passed away early, but he had left me a large inheritance, and my mother-in-law had been living there alone. Haruto had moved out after getting a job, and she only came home occasionally. It seemed that she had been feeling uneasy for a long time, so one day my mother asked us to move in with her. Living alone all the time makes me feel lonely, and I'm at an age where I have to worry about getting sick or injured. If I'm going to look for a new place, I don't need to pay rent, so if you don't mind, could you come live with me? That way we can spend more time together, and of course I won't get in the way of the newlyweds. Please consider this as a way to ease my anxiety. When I visited to introduce myself, my mother-in-law seemed to have a calm and reserved personality. She said that we would share living expenses, and that I, who don't work, would be in charge of housework and cleaning. She seemed to sense how lonely it was to live alone, and my husband and I couldn't just ignore her. We also wanted to have children in the future, so we were thinking of starting infertility treatment. Treatment involves expensive medical expenses over a long period of time. We had planned to cut back on our living expenses in the future because of the cost, but living with my parents would not only save money, but also give us more room to save. We could start treatment in a planned manner. At that point, we started to think quite positively about living together. To be honest, I think it's a dream come true. Rather than living together in the neighborhood and then moving in together, wouldn't it be better to live together now? We'd have to change our lifestyles so many times, and it would be a waste to even wait until the day we moved in. That's right. I don't want my mother to look so lonely. Living together in the Oni family was nerve-wracking, especially since we were in a marriage-locked relationship. But there didn't seem to be any better solutions, both financially and mentally, for my mother-in-law. We talked it over and decided to live together in a different household. When my mother-in-law heard our answer, she said, "Thank you. Thank you so much. Being a family makes me happiest," and she cried tears of joy. We started our new life without having to move in any of our belongings. But after a short time, my mother-in-law's attitude had completely changed. One day, she suddenly turned to me and said with a stern expression, "What's going on? You always come home late? You say you're at work, but is that really true? A sales job doesn't end when the customers leave, right? I wonder where you work if you don't come home this late, even after the department store closes." Quote. I was taken aback by her sudden words. Furthermore, my mother-in-law continued to ask me when I would quit. I have been entrusted with a position of responsibility. My work is not limited to sales, as I have meetings scheduled at department stores and other stores, so it is not unusual for me to work overtime every day when I am semi-busy. Of course, my husband knows this and has supported me without saying anything even when his wife stays later than him. I never expected that she would suggest that I quit my job and stay home, and I was perplexed. After all, a man who married into a family should devote himself to the home. How long do you intend to work? That would be unthinkable in my time. I would never have scolded a woman like that to my son.
Mother, I value my work too, and Haruto and I have decided to support each other in our lives. It is my husband and I's choice to continue working as we have been. I managed to argue back, trembling. However, my mother-in-law became even stricter and laughed at my words. A woman working will only disrupt the family. Mako-san has a responsibility to look after the house while her son is away. You should understand that better.
My argument was ignored, and my mother-in-law only tolerated my decision to quit. Gradually, my mother-in-law's delusions intensified, and she began to make ridiculous remarks, such as, "Isn't there something you can't say, that's why you haven't come home?" So I hurriedly spoke to my husband and had him intervene. Of course, there was nothing to be ashamed of. My husband was also shocked by my mother-in-law's outward behavior, but he intervened. He was dissatisfied, but he seemed to have given up on me enough to just complain. However, she continued to be sarcastic towards me. On the contrary, she suddenly said, "Oh, I don't feel like paying rent." But you don't need rent in the first place. I just want you to live here. Quote. Don't you understand that that's just an adult's excuse? Even in your parents' house, you have to be polite, so don't you feel ashamed of living here for free? If you want to continue working so much, how proud you are of yourself when you receive your salary as nothing. My mother-in-law began to propose something completely different from the initial conditions, trying to turn the promise into protection. Even though there is an inheritance, my husband and I are responsible for most of the daily living expenses. I don't think anyone around her has any financial complaints. And yet, it would be troublesome for us if she said that the conditions for living together were just a consideration. I firmly retorted to my mother-in-law her extremely rude behavior. She said she came here because she didn't want any rent. But if that's not the case, my husband and I should move out immediately. My mother-in-law's face immediately turned red and she started making a big fuss about how ungrateful she was. She didn't even pay the rent, let alone the parking fee. It seemed that she wanted to steer the conversation in the direction that even if it wasn't rent, she should at least pay the parking fee since she was letting her live there. She asked me to pay it as a parking fee, not as rent, but as a parking fee, but in terms of financial burden, it didn't make any difference. Furthermore, the amount my mother-in-law suggested was considerably higher than the average price of apartments in the neighborhood. I first consulted with my husband, and we agreed to give him some money every month. He probably just wanted some pocket money. My mother has been living alone and living frugally for a long time, so it's cheap if she can cover a little selfishness with money. It seemed like she was having a really hard time with my mother, and she spoke in a reserved manner. Kazugaku did as he asked, but when he gave him some as pocket money, his mother-in-law's attacks stopped temporarily. Although it was a bit disappointing, just when he thought that one problem had been solved, another incident occurred. To his husband's sister, Komi, who was also his sister-in-law, had returned. My sister-in-law had gotten married and moved out, but they had divorced for some reason. One day, she suddenly announced that she would be living here from that day on, carrying a large suitcase. I know it's a bit sudden, but it turns out that her husband had been cheating on her. That's why I came out and handed her the divorce papers. It's okay. I've been a housewife for a long time, so I won't make you suffer. Even as she said this, Yoshimi demanded a fancy dinner, saying, "Let's have some rice since we're here." His mother-in-law seemed happy that her daughter had returned, so she didn't have to worry about her, and it was clear that she was on her side. Apparently, her ex-husband was a wealthy man who had been a high-ranking employee at his company, and Yoshimi was wearing flashy brand name items. I held my head in my hands as I imagined her future spending sprees. We've met a few times at weddings, and she's 4 years older than me, just turning 40, so our conversations aren't very lively because of our awkward age. What's more, as soon as she found out about my job, she said something outrageous like, "Do you have any money or anything? Can't you buy it cheaply? Or rather, you're family, so why don't you get it for free?" Quote. This left both my husband and I stunned. When I rudely refused, she glared at me in irritation and lost interest. She's the kind of daughter-in-law who didn't listen yesterday. Well, she's getting old. Haruto must have been anxious. With her casual manner of saying things like this, I gradually began to feel my limits. My mother-in-law has a sore back. She told me not to overwork her and left the housework to me. Even though I work and my father-in-law is currently unemployed, we tried to share the work, but she's tired from the divorce scandal. She got annoyed and said, I didn't come back to work for her, and my workload at home kept increasing. Although she helped out at home, he often came home exhausted from working hard every day as an engineer. Eventually, my stress reached its limit, and I would suddenly burst into tears, have trouble sleeping for days, and it was no longer a matter of starting infertility treatment. I was so out of shape that I even consulted a counselor when I couldn't even manage my daily life. Seeing my pathetic state, my husband suggested that we move out immediately. It's wrong to go through this. I can't keep putting my moms off like this forever. I'm sorry. I should have taken better care of Meiko than my moms. But this isn't the time to be worrying about the cost. Mako's health is the most important thing. My husband said this and tried to help me right away. However, it was the season for graduations, enrollments, and job openings. Affordable properties were taken as soon as I took my eyes off them, and it seemed like it would be a while before we could move out of my parents' house. Meanwhile, Yoshishi's attitude continued to deteriorate as we failed to open up to him. I started using slightly more expensive spring cosmetics and accessories to work at the store as a salesperson. She was unemployed and had little disposable income. She seemed to be envious of my belongings, and when I noticed, the amount of things I had was reduced or the location of things changed, and other suspicious things kept happening. When I questioned her, she calmly confessed. What's the matter? I like this brand too. It's okay to borrow a little bit. It's my personal property. Don't use it without asking. Don't make a fuss just because I used the rep or borrowed a necklace for a day. We're family, so don't get worked up. You should tell your mother too. My daughter-in-law acts like she owns everything. I've warned her many times, but every time she calls my mother-in-law over and the two of them start picking on me. My mother-in-law looks annoyed and hesitant, telling me to be more careful, big sister. She blames me for making such a fuss just because I'm your big sister. With the situation not improving, I took measures to prevent my belongings from being touched and prepared a locked box, but eventually the key to that box was broken with a tool. The king of human bags gave up when I saw the small, shattered key in front of me. No matter how many times I warn them, they don't change, and now that they've broken the key, I've had enough. If they can't even follow the basic rule of not touching other people's things, then I can't live with them anymore. I'm moving out. I made this declaration to the two of them and started packing everything I could into a large bag. My mother-in-law followed me around in a rage, telling me to reconsider. She kept saying that she couldn't stand it anymore, but when she realized that I wouldn't listen, she started calling someone. The caller was none other than my parents' house. My mother picked up the phone and I could hear her complaining about the kind of education I was giving her daughter. I don't know what my mother said, but eventually the phone rang back to me. The person who called earlier was Haruto's mother, right? She said something really strange to me. Are you okay? Are you having trouble with your mother? It seems that my mother-in-law's rude words had gotten the better of me, and when I explained the situation, my mother became furious. She told me to come back right away. My husband, who heard the story later, also encouraged me to leave the house, saying that he would come and get me if I found a new place, so I started preparing in earnest and left my parents' house the next day. Of course, my mother-in-law didn't come to see me off or stop me. I planned to go back and forth between my parents' house, and my workplace while packing up my belongings at my parents' house. A few weeks later, I was cleaning my parents' house in the morning because I had to go to work in the afternoon. Then the phone at home rang. When my mother checked, she said, "It's your mother," and picked up the phone with a dejected look on her face. My mother, who was answering the phone, eventually made a strange face and signaled to me. It seemed that my mother-in-law on the other end of the line was saying something strange. I put the phone on speaker, and a familiar, loud voice came out, sounding cheerful. Life is going to be tough from here on out. I never thought something like that would happen to that child. What do you mean, who is going to have a hard time? That's what they say, daughter-in-law. I guess it's like karma goes with the flow. Your stupid daughter had a bad break and got into a big accident.
We looked at each other, huh? There was no accident or anything. I haven't left my parents' house since this morning. My mother-in-law is on another deadline and is talking about something. And to think she caused a major accident before she went to work. It's my fault for not stopping. This is so strange. There are just too many questions to answer. I called into the speaker to stop my mother-in-law from talking. You mean me by daughter-in-law, right? I'm fine. What's an accident? You're kidding me, right? What do you mean?
My
mother-in-law
was clearly flustered. The content of the call was strange for a poorly made-up lie. I couldn't believe it was a lie at all, so I pressed her on what it meant, but she just kept panicking and asking why I was okay. If it wasn't you, whose accident was it? I couldn't get enough of her. As I kept pressing her, my husband, who seemed flustered, appeared before my eyes. He rushed in and grabbed my shoulder, and as if he had confirmed that I was okay, he showed a relieved look on his face. Well, I'm glad I'm okay. What on earth happened? Mom and Haruto. What happened? When I asked, Haruto suddenly told me that the night had been in an accident. Oh, big sister, I'm glad Meiko wasn't involved. We're heading to the hospital now. Will you come with me? My husband asked me to, and I nodded without hesitation. We changed our afternoon shift to a day off, and we hurried to the hospital. When we got there, Yoshi was still receiving treatment, but we were told that his life was not in danger and that he was conscious. His mother-in-law, who had been dazed, was also there, and the husbands were relieved at first. After that, they went to the hospital and his parents' house, and while they were preparing the things he would need for his hospitalization, the treatment was over. Yoshi was taken to the hospital room, lying on the bed in a limp, pitiful state. She seemed to be able to talk, and my husband went over to her and started talking to her. I got in the car this morning to get a ride. But then the brakes gave out halfway through and I crashed into a telephone pole. I heard that no one was hurt. Yeah. It was a deserted road, so no one was hurt. But my sister's waist. We had already heard about the idiopathic psychiatric disorder caused by injuries sustained in a self-inflicted accident. Yoshishi was able to stop one person with his quick rescue, but he had hit his waist badly. As a result, he is now unable to move his lower body. He can no longer move his legs or walk, and there is no way he can live on his own. It is almost certain that the paralysis of his lower body will remain as idiopathic psychiatric disorder. Yoshishi, who was given the sentence with the explanation from his husband, could not believe it. He cried and tried to sue the maintenance company, but since he could only move his upper body, my husband easily restrained him. Certainly, the reason the brakes were not working could only be due to poor maintenance. I suddenly noticed my mother-in-law, who was sitting in the corner of the hospital room, looking very upset. Are you okay, Mom? I had been through a lot, but I couldn't afford to hold a grudge in a situation like this. I was worried because she looked like she was about to collapse, but my mother-in-law didn't say anything when I called out to her. At that moment, my husband asked her if she had any idea what had happened. His voice was so cold and stern that I was surprised and looked at him. I'm asking if you have any idea about my sister's car accident. My mother-in-law, trembling and pale with a pale face, shook her head and said no. No matter how many times my husband asked, the answer was the same. She denied it and said she didn't know, but I gradually had a bad feeling inside. My husband excused his father-in-law and operated her smartphone. All the cars the family owned were equipped with dashcams, and several weeks' worth of footage could be viewed using a dedicated app. He called up the data from his father-in-law's car and pressed the play button on the spot. There we saw an astonishing sight. This must be my mother. The lights came on in the garage and my mother-in-law's face appeared. I could see her peering into the car from behind the hood. She seemed to be carrying something, as she repeatedly crouched down and carried it to the front of his car. The dashcam recorded both video and audio, so I could hear the sound of something being dragged and her talking to herself. This is difficult. Huh, is it this way that it's so heavy? I think this is the right line. From the occasional sounds of her words, I could tell she was crawling under the car, searching for something. Then there was a loud bang. She was cutting something under the car. Both Yoshishi and I immediately understood what she was doing, and we could see the blood running down her hair. My mother-in-law began to shake violently as she was confronted with the video. Terrifying words could be heard from the video in her mother-in-law's voice. Now the daughter-in-law is going through hell. I could understand her attitude when she called my parents' house. My mother-in-law probably really wanted me to cause an accident. But it was Yoshishi who actually caused the accident. In the first place, she had mistaken my car for hers, but it turned out that she had taken the risk of doing something dangerous. I can't believe it. Mom, what would you have done if I had died? Yoshishi, who was furious when he learned the truth, asked her, but my mother-in-law immediately shouted that she hadn't been able to tell the difference between the cars. There was an unavoidable reason why my mother-in-law had mistaken the cars. In fact, my mother-in-law and I happened to be the same breed and color. It was discovered on the day my girlfriend came back home in a regular black domestic minicar, and we were both very surprised. My family home didn't have a parking space, so I left the car at my parents' house. Since I was planning to move out of my parents' house completely, and because of the change of address, I left it there except when I used it for work. There's no way we could have made a mistake since we use it regularly. We each have a designated spot in the garage to park. However, she always stands tall over me, and at any given time she chooses the one that's easiest for her to park in. No matter how many times I warn her, she never changes, so it's no wonder my mother-in-law can't tell which one is which. I also used the car yesterday, but when I got back, my father-in-law's car had already taken my space. I didn't feel like talking to her anymore, so I parked in her space and went straight home. But my mother-in-law had no idea that such a situation existed. She doesn't know much about cars, so she mined it without realizing it. The knight cried coldly and attacked my mother-in-law, saying it was her fault for not checking properly. My mother-in-law must have panicked too, because she started parking in the wrong place for no reason. Why is it your fault for not parking in a different place? What are you going to do now that you're in such a bad shape? What are you going to do? Is it my fault? It's your mother's fault, isn't it? It wasn't Chico who caused this incident, it was your mother. The two of them were exchanging insults, and the hospital was in chaos. My husband called the police because it became clear that I had driven into the car after taking me out of the hospital room. Since the accident had just happened, the police arrived immediately and asked them to respond. I submitted the footage from the car camera from earlier and the data that had been recorded when I entered the hospital room, and my mother-in-law was taken away on the spot. My mother-in-law, who had been making a fuss, turning pale, and not caring for me, was taken away, and my father-in-law, who had been crying so hard, slowly spoke to me and my husband. Hey, she's not a stranger, she's family. Even if your mother isn't here, Mako and the others will take care of her, right? Quote. He asked me about future care and nursing care, but before I could answer, my husband immediately knew that he didn't want to. My husband, who works as an engineer and works on cars, glared at my sister-in-law, looking dissatisfied. My sister-in-law must have been partly responsible for the accident. First of all, if the brake hose had snapped, the warning light should have come on. And if the brake oil had leaked out, it would have been immediately obvious that the brakes were not working properly. She should have just gotten out of the car at that point, but she forced it to start and drove until she was seriously injured. From my perspective, my sister is the one who is doing all the problematic things. My husband quickly dismissed her and started playing a video on his smartphone. It was footage from Yoshishi's dashcam, but the time had changed from before. It was this morning. It was before the accident, and it was the time when he was about to leave for work. Of course, Yoshishi was there. She was clearly trying to load a heavy bag into her car. The bag she was carrying looked like a small safe. I recognized it and exclaimed, "Isn't this the safe from your watch?" I exclaimed in surprise, and my husband nodded with a stiff expression. For some reason, the knight was trying to carry a valuable watch safe that her husband had been keeping safe. He seemed suspicious and flustered as he loaded the safe into the car and tried to drive out of the garage without checking the surroundings or fastening his seatbelt. The whole thing replayed in front of her, and her face turned pale just like her mother-in-law's from earlier. When her husband pressed her with a stern look, asking if she would talk, she began to reveal some outrageous things. At first, Yoshishi explained that he had driven the car to go to work, but in fact he had intended to take the watch and the safe with him and sell everything. He didn't have the key to the safe, but he had thought he could just break it once he arrived. He had noticed something strange about the brakes as soon as he started driving, but he was so anxious to get away from his parents' house before anyone noticed that he stepped on the accelerator, which led to the accident. She tried to explain herself while crying, but her husband looked down on her with astonishment. But he needed money right away to pay his ex-husband back. He thought he would borrow a little.
Yoshi got divorced and came back home, but she lied even then. She explained that she got divorced and returned to her parents' house because her husband cheated on her, but the truth was the exact opposite. Yoshi was the one who cheated. She was asked to pay alimony, so she ran away to her parents' house because she had no savings and couldn't live on her own. She didn't want to have to tell the pathetic story of having to pay alimony, so she made her ex-husband the bad guy in order to protect her suspension. Since she didn't go out to work after coming back, she couldn't keep track of the alimony she had to pay. So her sister-in-law sold off expensive items in the house without permission to get by, but there's a limit to everything. She finally set her sights on her husband's expensive watch, which led to this accident. Thinking about alimony was stressful, but as long as I was with my mother and breathing in Mako-san, I felt better. That's why you're such a terrible boss. I'll switch my feelings. Please. Don't abandon me.
Are you in despair thinking about your future? He began to speak in a soothing voice, but when he saw the knowing looks from my husband and me, he must have realized that he was at a disadvantage. What was it that made Yoshitane's eyes change so sharply and his mind change? He started shouting, "Don't run away. Support me and take care of me." Quote. Given his behavior up until now, there was no way his demands would be accepted. There's still compensation left. I was in an accident instead of you. Are you so ignorant that you ruined someone's life? You should pay for it instead. My husband and I listened in silence, but Yoshitane, perhaps because he was tired from the day, gradually began to spout off meaningless content. He was making so much noise that several nurses rushed to the scene, and my husband and I left the hospital room, agreeing to never come back. Later, the police came to question us and asked if we had any friends or acquaintances other than my husband who knew anything about cars. What my mother-in-law had done was nothing short of a criminal act, so we couldn't let her be arrested. However, there were still many unknowns, such as how my mother-in-law, who doesn't drive and doesn't know much about cars, came up with the idea of cutting the brake hose, and how she got the tools to do it. However, neither my husband nor I could think of anyone who might fit the bill. A few days later, the investigation revealed the shocking truth. It turned out that my mother-in-law had been infatuated with a young man she had met before my husband and I got married, and had been paying him money. The man was a very unscrupulous man who targeted elderly women and pretended to go on dates with them to extort money from them. My mother-in-law had been using her inheritance from Gifu and her living expenses to go on dates with the man, but when she began to struggle with her meager savings, she asked him to live with us, thinking that he would support her. Not satisfied with that, he tried to collect money under the pretext of rent and housekeeping, but we repeatedly refused to pay, saying that it was not what we had agreed to, and at her wit's end, my mother-in-law consulted the man. There, he told her something terrifying. If my wife died, her husband, her son, would receive the insurance money. If I use this, I can spend every day hanging out at an expensive hotel in an amusement park. My mother-in-law had long since become obedient to the man, so she jumped at the man's suggestion, bought the tools he specified, and put them into action. However, the car that was actually used to mine was the master's car, which led to this tragedy. The young man's identity has also been revealed. He was questioned, but the man said that he had spoken to her before, but that it was all a joke. He didn't tell her what to buy. He denied everything, saying that he had said nothing. He also kept saying things about going on dates, but that he and my mother-in-law were not in a romantic relationship, but were just taking advantage of her good spending habits. He insisted that he wasn't serious, so he couldn't commit a crime. However, as a result of manipulation by the police, who became suspicious, evidence was found that the plan to steal my insurance money from my husband was a serious one. Furthermore, other crimes, such as intimidation of women other than my mother-in-law, were revealed. Thus, the man was taken into custody along with my mother-in-law. After the trial, it seems that Yoshihito contacted his ex-husband, hoping to have his mother-in-law take care of him, but his ex-husband, who had already started his new life, took an umbrage with him and told him to pay compensation quickly, and that was the end of the conversation. He started using a helper from the welfare service, but Knight was selfish due to his father's death. No matter how many times he was warned, he treated the helper in charge like a pawn, so he was rejected by more and more private services, and he finally had no choice in who to choose. In the end, it seems that a calm helper who didn't give in to her strange selfishness at all was assigned to him. It seems that Knight repeatedly asked for someone who was cold and kind, who was considerate of others, but had the warmth of a good person, but no one came forward to replace the helper who was cold but did the minimum amount of work. In the end, it seems that he was the one assigned to him. There was also a change in my environment. Since I had caused my parents a lot of worry about this incident, I asked to be transferred to another store closer to my parents' house. My request was accepted, and I was finally able to start working near my parents' house. My husband felt uncomfortable living in the town where his suspicious family lived, so he changed jobs and decided to move near my family home. It will be a fresh start in a new place, but he is always trying his best to help me out, as he is concerned about the hardships he has caused me. My husband's watch, which was stolen by Yoshishi, was kept by the police for manipulation purposes, but was eventually returned. The safe was damaged due to the impact of the accident. Several of the watches inside were also broken, but my husband said that he would use this as a way to share the family's belongings, and he has decided to cut off all ties with his family. My husband and I have both gotten used to the new environment. And now we are in the process of choosing a hospital to begin infertility treatment, which was our original goal.